To many history fans interested in the history of ancient Greece, the rest of the ancient Balkan Peninsula often feels remote, distant, and exotic. Surviving written records about the various non-Greek peoples of ancient southeastern Europe, like the Thracians, Dacians, and Scythians, are viewed almost exclusively through the lens of Greco-Roman writers. There is, however, one group that stands out, the illuminatingly illustrious Illyrians. This collection of tribes, once roughly inhabiting the regions of former Yugoslavia and Albania, first appeared by this name in Hecataios of Miletos's writings in the 6th century BCE, but remains elusive to many today. And yet, despite their glaring underrepresentation in the historical record, the Illyrians were just as active in the ancient world as the Greeks. Who were the Illyrians? How did they interact with their neighbors, and what impact did they have in the world of the ancient Balkans? In this video, we will explore all of these questions and more. Some definitions. Before we get into the history, culture, and society of our subject peoples, let us first explain their nomenclature. The name Illyrians is an exonym that was used by the Greeks to describe most of the tribal populations living in the Western Balkans, with a few coastal exceptions such as the Ligurians. The origin of the word Illyrian is unclear, though some theories claim that it may have been the indigenous name of a small group of southern tribes near Lake Ohrid that was then expanded by the Greeks to all similar peoples in the wider region. Due to this, it is unclear if all the people described in classical texts as Illyrians had similar cultures and languages, or if Illyrian was a catch-all term used by the Greeks and Romans to describe many different cultures within the Western Balkans. Trying to pin down the Illyrians chronologically also presents significant difficulties. The name first appears in the historical record in the 6th century BCE, but could have been in use much earlier, since the Greeks were trading with the coastal regions of Illyria centuries before that. The Illyrian name faded out of the historical record in the 7th century CE, by which time it referred not to a people but to a Byzantine province named in the Western Balkans, named after the ancestral peoples of the region. Thus, we are not sure if the Illyrian peoples disappeared or evolved into another modern group. In this video, we will focus on the classical, Hellenistic and Roman periods of Illyria and its peoples, but will touch on earlier and later periods as well. Archaic Illyria. The origins of the Illyrians are elusive. We don't know if they have any proven connections to any previous Paleolithic, Neolithic and Bronze Age cultures in the Western Balkans, and thus are unsure if the Illyrians are indigenous to the region or moved in at some point in the mists of prehistory and assimilated any previous inhabitants. In Greek mythology, the Illyrians were described to have come from a patriarch called Illyrios, who was either the son of the Odyssean Cyclops Polyphemos and the Nereid Galatea, or of the Phoenician prince Cadmos and Harmonia, the daughter of Ares and Aphrodite. The earliest known mention of the Illyrians in the historical record comes from surviving fragments of the Greek writer Hecataios of Miletos, who describes a few coastal cities on the Adriatic coast, such as Oidantium, as belonging to the Illyrians. When the Greeks began to colonize coastal regions in the Mediterranean from around 900 BCE, we can assume that they connected with the Illyrians through both inland and coastal trade. Moreover, we can assume that the Macedonians of northern Hellas, whose lands bordered Illyria, had ample interactions with the Illyrian tribes as well. The Illyrians during this period likely only existed as highly regionalized and fragmented tribal groups. Some Illyrianization of other local groups is also possible during this period as the culture began to spread through trade. As the Archaic period progressed, power structures within the Illyrian peoples slowly began centralizing, with regional kingdoms like the Taulanti coming to prominence. We know of these kingdoms only through Greek sources, so we have no inside look at how they functioned culturally or politically. It is possible that these Illyrian kingdoms were not kingdoms in the traditional sense, but tribal confederacies with some sort of leader chosen through unknown means. The oldest confederacy of Illyrian tribes was the Enchilai, who were said to have lived in the region of Lake Ohrid. According to tradition, they invaded Macedonia in the 6th century BCE and to have moved as south as Delphi, sacking the oracle of Apollo's sanctuary. An Illyrian kingdom, which appeared in the historical record later on, was called the Taulanti, which controlled territory on the Adriatic coast around what is today Albania. This kingdom has the earliest known named ruler of an Illyrian polity, a king named Galaros, who reigned from 678–640 BCE. This Illyrian kingdom also invaded Macedonia, only to be repulsed by the Macedonian king Argaeus. This pattern of Illyrian invasions into Macedonia continued for centuries, only stopping during the reign of the immortal Philip II, the father of Alexander the Great. The Tauranti, with their coastal holdings, also came into contact with Corinthian colonies along the coast, such as the polis of Epidamnos. These connections between Illyrians and Greeks increased trade in the region as trade hubs. On the coast, continued to take minerals and goods into the Mediterranean. Classical Illyria. As the classical period dawned, the Illyrians were drawn ever closer to the politics of the Hellenic world. After securing aid from Corinth against the tribes of the Dalmatian-dwelling Liburi in the 7th century BCE, the southern Illyrian tribes had cultivated enough good relations with the Greeks to occasionally appear during the Peloponnesian Wars. Thucydides mentions that during the war in 423 BCE, the famed Spartan general Brasidas allied himself with an Illyrian tribe and inspired them to lead to yet another devastating, albeit unsuccessful, invasion of Macedonia. Another Illyrian kingdom, the Dardani, also became involved in this titanic clash between Athens and Sparta. Ruling over territory around what is now Kosovo, the Dardani had risen to power during the 6th to 5th century BCE. Having done so through urbanization and trade with its neighbors, they grew very successful and even managed to be one of the few Illyrian hosts to successfully invade Macedon, pouring into the northern Hellenic kingdom during the reign of Amyntas III, who incidentally had married an Illyrian princess, the daughter of King Cyrus. The Dardani Illyrians deposed the Macedonian king and imposed a puppet regime, which was only overthrown with the coming of Philip II. The Dardani invasion of Macedon is an example of the intriguing interplay that existed between the Macedonian and Illyrian kingdoms in culture and politics due to their conflict and how they ended up making peace. During the classical period, the Illyrians were divided into many kingdoms, such as the Partheni, the aforementioned Taulanti and Dardani, and the central southern kingdom of Dasareti. The king of the Dardani kingdom, an old geezer called Bardalis, spent decades raiding into Epirus and Macedon and was the one to impose the puppet regime. Bardalis invaded the region of Molossia and occupied it, only retreating after the Spartan king Agesilaos deployed an expedition to push them out. From this point on, the historical record becomes blurry, but when the mighty Philip II came to power, he seems to have engaged in war with the Dasareti to enforce his rule over Macedon. Philip defeated his Illyrian foes at the Battle of Erigon Valley, where, in an open field, the two evenly matched armies fought until Philip's troops achieved victory. Sources differ on whether Bardalis, by then said to have been over 90 years old, either died in battle or sued for peace. What we do know is that peace was achieved and the borders of Macedon and Dasareti were fixed around Lake Ohrid, subordinating Illyria to Macedon's influence, but not direct control. Philip was also married to an Illyrian princess, Odata, mother of the famous Sinane, the famous Illyrian warrior princess and half-sister to Alexander the Great. This union shows that as often as the Macedonians and Illyrians made war on each other, the cultural and marital ties between Macedonian and Illyrian nobilities ran deep. When Philip II was assassinated, the Illyrian rulers Glaucius and Kleitos the son of Bardalus, rose up in revolt against his son Alexander. This proved to be the first test of Alexander the Great's military skills. In the siege of Pelium, Alexander defeated kings Kleitos and Glaucias, ensuring Macedonia's northern frontiers were secured. Hellenistic Illyria. It was not long after Alexander's death in faraway Babylon that the Illyrians were up in arms once again. During the wars of the Diadochi, King Glaucias, who had stayed in power after his defeat in Pelium, forged an alliance with some city-states like Epidamnos and fought against Cassander, son of Antipater of Alexander's Diadochi and then king of Macedon. Cassander had taken control of the region of the Taulanti and the coastal Greek cities in 314 BCE, but Glaucias managed to retake them 2 years later. He also adopted a young Pyrrhus, king of Epirus, by taking him and the royal family of Epiros into his court, after they were expelled by the pro-Cassander faction of the court of Epiros. In 307 BCE, Glaucias invaded Epiros and installed the teenage Pyrrhus on the throne. We know little of his life after then, besides one visit by Pyrrhus, but his reign is proof that Illyrian polities were not marginal actors in Balkan geopolitics, but played a key role in the fate of the Greek world. The instability of the wars of the Diadochi caused many previously pacified Illyrian regions to expunge any Macedonian control from the time of Philip II. However, in the 4th to 3rd centuries BCE, the incursion of Celtic tribes from the north caused mass stress in the region, forcing some of the tribes further north to centralize into the kingdom of the Ardeaei, whose lands were centered around the coasts of Herzegovina, Montenegro, and southern Dalmatia. The most important rulers of this kingdom were Agron and his wife, Tuta. Agron, who reigned after his father Pleuretos Secu, organized the construction of Illyrian navies, which, according to Roman historians, engaged in mass piracy across the Adriatic Sea. It is here that the presence of the Roman eagle begins to cover the Balkan skies. As Roman outposts in the southern Balkans like Corcyra began to be attacked by Illyrians, Rome found a convenient excuse to further its imperial interests in the region. It was during the reign of the Illyrian queen Tuta that, according to Cassius Dio, a group of Roman ambassadors was murdered and imprisoned. This was the incident that caused the First Illyrian War between the Roman Republic and the tribes of the Adriatic coastline. This war lasted from 231 to 229 BCE and devastated Illyria. Ultimately, having been unprepared for the might of the Roman legions, Queen Tuta was forced to forge a peace treaty with the Romans and allegedly abdicated her throne in 227 BCE. The Illyrian-Roman War, fought during the reign of the Illyrian king Demetrios, lasted from 229–219 BCE and ended with the Romans defeating the Illyrians once more. Demetrios' successor, Pleurates III, was a Roman ally during the Second Punic War, but his son Gentius took a more hostile stance against the Latin Republic. Eventually, Gentius aligned himself with Macedon and the Dardanians and then declared war against Rome. This turned out to be the wrong horse to back. After Rome defeated Macedon in 168 BCE, they descended upon the Adriatic coast with a vengeance, subduing the Illyrians. Roman Illyria. After this, Roman rule over the Adriatic coast was all but secured. However, in the hinterlands, individual Illyrian tribes continued to resist the Romans for the rest of the 2nd century BCE. In 58 BCE, Gaius Julius Caesar was given proconsulship of Gallia Cisalpinum, which bordered Illyria and aimed to invade it after the Gallic Wars. In order to stymie Illyrian raids, he demanded that Illyrian tribes provide him with valuable hostages and troops for his armies. Caesar's civil war with Pompey also took place partially in Illyria, with the siege of Oricum taking place in what is today Albania. Later, Octavian initiated an invasion of hinterland Illyria, subdued the local tribes, and conquered the region, incorporating it into the empire as the province of Illyricum. It is essentially at this point that the last independent Illyrian states disappear forever. Throughout Roman rule, Illyria was a common place where legion veterans were given land to settle. Given northern Illyria's proximity to the Danube and to the ornery Germanic tribes there, the province became heavily fortified during the later centuries of Roman rule, especially in the north. Later, emperors like Vespasian reorganized Illyricum into various provinces like Pannonia and Dalmatia, which were also closely connected to the nearby province of Noricum. Illyricum was an important province to the empire, crucial because of its mineral resources, as well as its strategic ports in places like Dalmatia. The settlements of legion veterans in the region may have contributed to its cultural Latinization, with some scholars hypothesizing that the Romance-speaking peoples that populated the Dalmatian coast throughout the Middle Ages were descended from retired Roman legionnaires. However, this is disputed. Over centuries of Roman rule, Illyria became one of the most highly urbanized provinces of the empire. Many emperors were natives of northern Illyria, such as the famous Diocletian, whose estate can still be found near Split in modern-day Croatia. These Illyrian emperors, as they were called, show that Illyria was fully integrated into Roman military, economic and political life, at least for the selectively enfranchised minority in the region. Illyrian culture, society and religion. Now that we have discussed Illyrian history, we will now discuss the Illyrians' cultural and religious practices, and there is much to discuss. Illyrian culture and society are known to us from some textual sources, but mostly from archaeology. Some classical Greco-Roman writers provide us with somewhat outlandish tidbits of Illyrian culture. Herodotus, for example, mentions that the Illyrians had open markets for selling one's daughters for marriage, but claims like these are dubious at best. What we know for sure is that Illyrians were good with iron and pottery. Fragments of Illyrian pottery recovered by archaeologists showed that they incorporated design elements from their neighbors, borrowing motifs from the Greeks. The infamous Illyrian helmets, which come in various Etruscan, Roman and Greek varieties, were very popular throughout the region. The Illyrian language is unknown to us, and we do not know if it has any modern survivors, nor do we know how widespread it was or how many different dialects it had. Moreover, the religion of the Illyrians is just as obscured as their linguistics. There exists some evidence that the Illyrians had naturalistic beliefs, as Illyrian decorations show evidence of solar and serpent. Horse burials took place in Illyria, likely as a form of sacrifice. We know that the Illyrians likely had a polytheistic pantheon, which varied from region to region. Various ancient writers make mention of a possible Illyrian war god named Medoros in the cities of Ricinium and Andinus amongst the Dardanians. Illyrian religion in Roman times underwent heavy Romanization, as Silvanus, the Roman equivalent of the satyr god Pan, became a powerful cult in the region. Athena Domus was popular in the city of Apollonia, and many Mithraea or sacred temples to the Roman military mystery cult of Mithras were founded around Illyria before Christianity took an early hold in the region. This Romanization occurred on top of previous waves of Hellenic religious influence. For instance, in Nakavane Cave, in southern Dalmatia, archaeologists discovered fragments of a 2nd century BCE Hellenistic zodiac, which, while fragmentary, shows Cancer, Pisces, Sagittarius, and Gemini-esque drawings. The zodiac is part of an astrologer's board, made of ivory and surrounded by Hellenistic fineware fragments. This means that this astrologer was established and popular in the region, and that said region had connections to the pan-Hellenistic magical practitioner networks, with their origins in Alexandria. We can thus see that Illyria was a very well-connected part of the ancient world, as reflected in its religious changes. Late Antique Illyria. The coming of Christianity into the Balkans on the 1st century CE included Illyria and coincided with proto-churches appearing in the region. By this time, Illyro-Roman culture, the mixed culture of Illyria and Rome, was dominant in the region. Around the 3rd and 4th centuries, fortifications in the late antique style began to appear in the region of Kosovo. Illyria began to see more Gothic peoples due to their migrations to the Balkans, but we can assume that the Latinized and local populations maintained their presence. Illyrian military and noble presence continued in the higher echelons of the Eastern Roman Empire, as the Theodosian dynasty had roots in the region. The linguistic and cultural makeup of the general Illyrian population during this stage of late antiquity is unclear. They may have been assimilated into Latinite thought, but also mixed in with new arrivals. In 347 CE, Illyricum became a prefecture of the Eastern Roman Empire. In fact, the predecessor of the great Justinian the Fair, Justin the Fierce, was originally a swineherd from this very prefecture and possibly was an Illyro-Thracian himself. Scholars like Anthony Caldelis claim that the reputation of Thracians and Illyrians as strong and martial people is an explanation for why Justin ended up in the imperial guard. This is likely the case because he had a strong Thracian presence in the guard, which he could leverage against other factions, like the Goths and Isaurians, to become emperor. Slowly but surely, the early Slavs began to arrive in the region, and many settled in what is today former Yugoslavia and the rest of the Balkans, alongside the existing descendants of the classical Illyrians, Celts, Thracians, and Goths. The prefecture ended in the 630s, as the organized Slavic tribes ended control of Byzantium over the region. This is the last known mention of the name Illyria in any administrative context, with the Miracula Sancti Demetrii, or the miracles of Saint Demetrios of Thessaloniki, being the last mention of the name in any historical text. After this, the Illyrians and Illyria in general faded from memory, until the name was co-opted and used by nationalist movements in the 19th and 20th centuries. Conclusion: after the 7th century CE, the name Illyria disappeared from history, but the region remained at a crossroads between Hellenic, Latin, and European cultural hubs, as evidenced by the stunningly beautiful diversity of the region today. The Illyrians, ever elusive in their tongue and culture, were ever present in the Adriatic seas and Balkan mountains. They were not marginal people, influencing and being influenced by others. Their ships roamed the regions and impacted them as much as the Greeks and Romans did. While we may not know how they spoke, their actions and culture spoke throughout the centuries, either through Byzantine emperors from the region or through their daring wars with Macedon and Rome. The Illyrians were ever illustrious, and their history is not meant to be a footnote in ancient history, but a shining chapter, as shining as Rome and Greece's, and as powerful as Thrace and Dacia's. More videos on the lesser-known cultures of the ancient world are on the way.